All right, let's get going. Once again, welcome everyone to the 2026 Retention Report Executive Briefing webcast. My name is Danny Nelms. I'm the CEO at Work Institute. So really appreciate your time today. We're going to jump into this pretty quickly, but I wanted to start just being a little bit reflective. Not sure how many of you know, but this is the 10th year that we have published a retention report. This started way back in 2017. We were just running the numbers this morning. Um, the collective years of the report, all 10 years, have been downloaded 15,000 times. So that's something that we're really proud of. We're proud of the work that we've done over the years. And what we're really proud of is it's been so useful to so many people. Obviously, we think a lot of companies have taken this data and really created conversations internally. But a ton of students have actually downloaded this. You can actually find it in dissertations for master students, even a few doctoral dissertations. We've seen it there. So we're glad that this data has been helpful and useful to so many people. And barring anything crazy, we're going to just keep going. So we really appreciate it. So we're in an interesting time. If you look at the labor market headlines right now, turnover appears to be down. We look at that through the BLS window of the quit rate, and we'll talk more about that in a few minutes. But, kind of the chaos of the Great Resignation seems to have basically be behind us. But then when we look a little bit deeper, when we start to look at why people are leaving, we start to look at some of our core driver ratings, even some of the external data that we see on a routine basis. It really looks like even though stability seems to return, that the confidence of the employees has not. And we'll get into some data to really talk through that. But I think um, it's good that turnover's down. That's a positive sign, but it may be that we've got some challenges on the horizon depending on what we see in terms of our economy. We know that the economic indicators out there are just all over the board right now. So it's going to be a really interesting 6 to 18 months, I think. And so we're going to really have to have our guard up, and that's a lot of what we're going to talk about. Um, Employees are definitely staying longer. That's what the data is telling us, and that's what we're seeing. But I think in many cases, they're reassessing their future, and we're going to see signs of that. And certainly, as I mentioned, even though turnover has slowed, the sentiment hasn't recovered. And we've got some specific data that's really going to show that. So this is a cautious workforce. And maybe that's mirrored by a lot of cautious employers as well. But it's a really cautious workforce right now that's really kind of in waiting, I believe. By the way, I didn't mention this, but I'd love for you all to interact via the chat box. I think it's the best way. That's something that I keep an eye on. It's easier than the Q&A for some reason, I think. So, even though we don't have you all on camera and on mics, I'd love some interaction via the chat at any point, and I'll try and stop along the way and answer any questions that I can. So that would be great. So going back to this national quit rate trend, again, this is kind of what it looks like. We've seen declines since the Great Resignation of 2022 each year. So we're sitting right now at about 2015, 2016 levels. And I would say that if you look back sort of 25 years, which is how long we've had this data available to us via the Bureau of Labor Statistics, that we're just slightly above average for what we look at in terms of annual turnover. So it's not low by any stretch of the imagination. We still have over 30 million people leaving annually out of a workforce of about 65 million or so. So there's still a significant amount of folks leaving. But as we go through this, I think we're going to see where our risk is accumulating, either as to why people are leaving or maybe who the people are that are leaving that's part of this risk. And then again, we have what I would call kind of this quiet disengagement going on in organizations that I think is really harmful to our companies and to us as employers. that we're going to have to really lean into, I think, over again the next 6 to 18 months. One, I think, important note, and anybody that's heard me talk and speak over the years knows how much emphasis we put on cost of turnover. Again, we take a very conservative approach here at Work Institute. We say it's 33% of base pay. We know that there are certainly some jobs that the turnover rate is much higher. I know for a lot of our healthcare clients here, a nurse is pretty much one-time salary, if not a little bit more, maybe a little less in some instances. So we know that there are certainly roles in which the cost of turnover is greater than 33%, but there's some that's a little less as well. And we, just a couple of years ago, we did some meta-analysis to make sure that our number was still accurate, and it really is. So it is a costly thing when someone walks out the door. So even though our turnover is back to those sort of 2015, 2016 levels. As you can see from this graphic, our cost of turnover is substantially higher. We all have felt it. We felt the inflation that's going on in terms of the services that we utilize, whether that be background checks, whether that be drug screenings, advertising, all of those things. But you've also got the elevation in wages that has occurred over the last several years. So even though our turnover is down, our cost is not down near as much. And so that's something that we need to really be paying attention to in our organizations, is always what is it costing us? So our cost of turnover may not actually have gone down as much as our turnover has gone down. And so we have to really pay attention to it. We have to report on that, report out on it. And I've said this many times, but what we really want, especially for you on the phone that are on this webcast that are HR leaders, many times you're trying to present this as a business problem, and when you apply dollars to it, then certainly you're addressing this as a business issue, a financial issue, not just as an inconvenience for the HR department and for talent acquisition. We know all of the things that go into turnover in terms of the stress it creates in the organization, people having to do two jobs, the training that has to go on, all of the things that make up our cost of turnover are really things that we have to pay attention to. So if you're not reporting on your cost of turnover, I'd highly encourage you to start doing that. So most folks that are downloading the retention report, that are probably, here for this webcast, are really saying, well, what's going on in the bigger picture? Why are people leaving? And there hasn't been a few notable big trends changes in terms of from 24 to 25. I think if we look at the broader trend, we're going to see some kind of interesting things here. But what hasn't changed is that the career reasons remain the number one reason why people leave. Basically, 1 out of every 5 people that leaves the organization is going to cite some sort of career issue as the reason that they're leaving. And we're going to dig into that a little bit more, because there are some really telling elements that are underlying this career issue. Number 2 is work-life balance. Now, again, there's not been a big change from 24 to 25, but we see that this just continues to go up year after year. And so we've got some things we want to talk about in terms of work-life balance. Then this health and family bucket, this is getting harder and harder to really nail down in terms of some of the issues that are going on. We have a category called other, because it's something that can't be defined within our current code set. And that's actually the biggest of the sub themes that go into that health and family issue. Everything from childcare to elder care to health issues to mental health issues to financial challenges. All of those sort of get into this health and family issue category, and it's grown, and it's still very high. Management comes in at number 4, and then total rewards comes in as 5th. And we've seen those total rewards numbers since 2022 continue to decline. And I've said this every year, since we began doing this. Maybe the number one thing that we've always tried to do is to sort of be mythbusters. If any of you remember the old show, Mythbusters. And obviously, one of the myths that we always think is out there is that people think that employees leave because of money. They leave because of pay. And our data has proven year after year after year that that's not the number one reason why people leave. Less than 1 in 10 people are citing the root cause of the reason they left as pay. Now, I think it's often a little bit of a proxy. I've again said this many times, and for those of you that have been on this for years, you've heard me say people in their minds are saying, you don't pay me enough to put up with. And it's that fill in the bucket that we have to get to in order to improve retention in our organization, whether that's work life balance, whether that's a bad manager, whether that's a career issue that's going on. That is the underlying issue that we have to address in our organizations. The other two, just real quickly, we got job reasons that have continued to decline. This is really about the job itself and the fact that I don't like the specific job characteristics, so I'm going to do something completely different, and that's continued to decline. We saw a little bit of a decline in management reasons for leaving, but again, that's 1 out of every 10 people are leaving because of their manager. And I've got some really important data to share in terms of the sub themes around this. So this is overall what's going on in the broader employee retention space right now in terms of why people are leaving. Again, no dramatic shifts, I don't think, from 1 year to the next. But again, we got these just prevailing career issues that are going on in organization. We've got the work-life balance issues continuing to rise. And the big thing is that these are things that can be controlled. I think the number, I get to it a little bit later, I should have it in my memory, but I think it's 75 point something percent of all reasons for leaving can be controlled by the organization. They're more preventable, and we've got to be able to address that as organizations. So I talked earlier about the sentiment that we see. So one of the important things that we do in our exit interviews, which is where all this data comes from, is not just asking why people leave, but asking about these core drivers of retention and engagement. So talking about the company as an employer, the manager, the team, and the job itself. And so we ask those in an open-ended way, and we get feedback related to each of those core drivers of engagement and retention. And so what you see is that there has been a little bit of an improvement in 2025 over 2024, but in no way have we really rebounded to the 2019 levels of pre-pandemic, certainly not to the pandemic levels, with the exception of this of the manager ratings, which have actually gone up a little bit over what they were in 2019. But when we say that confidence hasn't returned, this is really one of the primary data points that we're looking at, is that all this time we've seen turnover going down, but at the same time, we were seeing these core driver ratings around team and job and organization go down, and they've started to tick back up slightly, but they're not at levels that they were pre-pandemic, which is troublesome. So that tells it that there are still underlying concerns in organizations with employers, that employees are just not seeing the improvements that they'd like to see. They're not seeing the environment that they would like to do their best work in. We don't attempt to measure engagement. That's a whole different webcast, but these are what we see as the drivers of engagement. And so when we look at these, we see some real opportunities for improvement in organizations. So this is why we're saying that this stability that we seem to have in terms of the decline in turnover isn't represented in other data. And if you look at external data, again, I'm not one that believes in engagement measures, but let's just say that for sake of argument that, Gallup's engagement measure is correct. They're saying that only like 31% of employees are actually engaged in their work. I've seen other companies where it'll be somewhere around 50% or so. But again, it's only slightly going down or slightly going up, and it's not at levels that it was several years ago. So we've still got a lot of work to do in our companies and as employers in order to improve that over the next, again, 6 to 18 months. So again, the way I would describe what we've got going on right now is this quiet disengagement. And I think what we really need to define it as is risk. I think we have growing risk in our organizations right now. We saw this to some degree on a much slower trajectory coming out of the 2009 recession. We saw, quits go steadily up for a number of years. And then we saw them go down immediately after the pandemic and then the spike during the Great Resignation. Uh, and a lot of that is economic driven. Okay, let's face it. So from 2009 until the pandemic, we had a fairly consistently growing economy. Jobs during the Great Resignation hit, what was it, 11 million open jobs in the US, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics. We're sitting at about 6.5 million open jobs right now. If things were to start to turn around from a job creation standpoint, this is the underlying risk that exists in our organizations, is because people are looking, they're searching, they're looking at opportunities, but they're not ready to move because they're cautious because of the external market. And that's the troublesome part. They're not staying because they want to stay with their company, with their employer. They're not excited about being there. They're not necessarily engaged, but they're also not leaving. And so it's creating kind of this troublesome storm from my perspective, that we've got folks in our organizations that don't necessarily want to be there. They're probably not being at their most productive selves. They're not going that extra level, or that giving that discretionary effort that we always look for in terms of true engagement. It's not a great situation. Again, it's good that we've got lower turnover. It means that we don't have as much potentially cost related to that turnover, but it's only going to take external factors to turn that around if we're not doing more as employers to create better conditions internally. So the way I describe that to some degree is that the gaps between what employees expect and what employers deliver is continuing to grow, or is at least not shrinking so much. You might recall last year, in our 2025 retention report, we talked a lot about these expectations that employees have. We talked about it as emerging expectations or an emerging workforce. And the things that were important to them. And we continue to see these things that are important to them bear out in the data itself. And that's what we're going to look at over the next few slides, is companies that don't meet those expectations are still seeing people leave, just not at the levels that they were several years ago. But the expectations exist. And for those employees that are just hanging out because those expectations are not being met, or are going to eventually leave, or again, they're going to continue to not be as productive as you need or want them to be. So, as most of you know, we look at the overall category themes, or what we call categories of turnover, but within each of those categories, we have sub themes. So, within career, we have 6 different sub themes. We have school, people leaving for school, we have people leaving for promotion, job security, a different career altogether, development, and then we have that other category as well. And this is what's concerning us most in this data, is that the development reasons, although they were on the rise for several years, over the last 3 years have really declined pretty substantially. A little bit of a bump up from 2024 to 2025, but it's this promotion number that's starting to increase at this point. And this really is reflective of this external economic environment. Companies generally aren't growing as fast. So if they're not growing, they're not able to provide those promotion opportunities to some of their best performers. And those best performers are also the most marketable. So what do you know? They're actually going somewhere else to take a promotion somewhere else. And so this is a challenge for organizations right now because, again, generally this is some of your better performers or your top performers, some of your key talent that are probably falling into this category. Um, we don't have near as many clients do this as I would like us to see. But one of the variables that I think we should probably be looking at in our turnover data is performance rating, or whether they're part of key talent, or some companies talk about it as regrettable, non-regrettable. Those are important factors that we need to be looking at, because if they're top performers, high performers, they're in our succession plan and they leave, then we're starting to really leave holes in our organization that we've got to pay attention to. And so that's really the key message here. And again, it's something that there's this sort of underlying cautiousness as well as underlying issues that are going on that we have to be able to address, even though overall turnover may be going down. So this is something that we got to keep our eye on. We need to be continuing to look at our exit data. One of the things that we certainly see is that during these times, people actually put less emphasis on their exit data. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that at the end. But it's super important that we're paying attention to why people are leaving. I talked about these work-life balance issues. I don't think anything here is terribly surprising, but I wanted to point out the sub-themes just for a couple of things. One, the shift schedule is still a little bit of the driver of this increase, but look at remote capability. We just started tracking this, several years ago, and we're starting to see an uptick in people leaving due to a lack of remote capability. We said this last year, and I'm going to say it again: remote work is here to stay. Even though not every employee is able to work remotely, nurses, hospitality, some of those, manufacturing, don't have remote capability. I think it was McKinsey came out with this right after the pandemic and said that about 50% of the workforce did have the potential to work at least some of the time remotely. And so that's one of those things that we have to pay attention to. The second thing I think is just flexibility in general. We have to create flexibility as a structure in a job, not just sort of this optional thing. Um, I, I'm seeing some companies start to be a lot more creative around this. We're seeing in healthcare and manufacturing in particular, it was very traditional that those type of organizations had very set shifts. Let's just use manufacturing for an example. It was 10-hour shifts, 4 on, 4 off. That's the way it worked. And it started, it was an 8 to 6, 8 to 5, 8 to 6, whatever that 10-hour shift was. That's the way it was, and that's the way it was going to be. And if you didn't fit into that shift schedule, then tough, you were going to have to go somewhere else. Now we're starting to see that people are noticing the need to make changes to those and having some stair step shifts, especially in healthcare. We're also seeing probably more in healthcare than manufacturing, making it easier for people to do things like swapping shifts with someone else. There's apps out there that are available now that make it much easier for people to switch shifts with others, to create flexibility there. And so we're going to have to understand that flexibility is really a, a non-starter in terms of, if we don't offer it, then employees are definitely going to be looking for the grass is greener somewhere else. So this is something that's we've got to be paying attention to. So maybe out of all of the things in our retention report this year, this might be the most troubling for me. I mentioned earlier that we've seen the manager reasons overall go down slightly over from the last 2 years, but look at this sub-theme trend. Professional behavior is on the rise. It's risen each of the last 4 years. Now, This is the way managers are treating their employees. It's a little bit of a tough one to define. I continue to look at our definition and make sure it's right. You can make an argument that communication and knowledge and skills and support are all part of this professional behavior. But this is sort of unique in that this is the way people talk to others. It's fairness. It's about it's about tone and how people are talked to. Those are the things that fall into this professional behavior. What that's telling me is that we're accepting behavior in our organization that we shouldn't. We're allowing managers that we probably all know are not um, as professional as we would like for them to be, but we're not doing anything about it. We're continuing to accept certain level of behavior, and employees notice it and they decide to leave because of it. I also think we're not training enough. We're not doing enough development, or we're not doing it the best way possible. One of the things that we're seeing, again, we see this huge uptick in online learning, and that's kind of considered a staple in a lot of, especially larger organizations. But there's real questions around the efficacy of online learning. So then if we're not doing it online, then we're doing it in some sort of a lecture environment, which also doesn't have extremely high efficacy. What we do here at Work Institute is called facilitated learning, which is the highest level of efficacy. And so we need to be seeing organizations not only look at how they're training, what channels are they training through, but what is their training philosophy? How are they making sure that there is efficacy in what people are learning? And more importantly, are they applying what they're learning in the training that we're providing them? And so this is super critical right now. And I think we've got to reevaluate, are we continuing to train and develop our leaders in our organization? And is it being effective? Whether it be using 360s, whether it's your engagement assessments, whether it's your exit interviews, all of those things can be looked at and evaluated in terms of our manager's behavior acceptable. So this environment trend certainly took a big jump up from last year from 7.2 to 8.1. I didn't mention that at the outset, but it might be one of our biggest increases. But it still falls below those kind of top five reasons. What's interesting is kind of the themes in here, and we continue to see things like coworker issues come up. Again, this almost goes back to this behavior acceptance. We've got teammates that aren't playing well together in the sandbox, so to speak, and yet we're still allowing it to happen, and so we're seeing people leave because of uh, teamwork issues, or because of coworker issues. So this is something we've also got to look in our data around, again, with our engagement assessments, with our satisfaction surveys, with our stay interviews, whatever data we're bringing to the table, we need to be looking at that. And culture is a big thing. And one of the things that I've done a lot of in the last year or so is really study this issue of culture. And I've actually spoken about this at several conferences over the last year. I think for a lot of us, we think of culture as sort of the soft skills in the organization, or the soft part of the organization. We think of our mission and our values, and we think of how we celebrate wins, or how we celebrate birthdays, and all of those things that go. What are the perks we're providing? Do we do different things in terms of, do we have a pool table at work, or do we have ice cream Fridays, or whatever those things are. We think of those as the culture, but the culture is really made up of the systems in the organizations: how we hire, how we train, how we manage performance, how we're rewarding people. All of those things have to be the underpinning pillars underneath our culture to guide what we want our culture to be like, what we want people to do in terms of behavior in our culture. And so I think we can't get distracted by all those other things, even though they can be very positive in reinforcing our culture. We really got to be looking at the systems that build our culture in our organization in order to make sure that we're getting it right. Again, I encourage you all to throw a question in the chat. I haven't seen any so far. Oh, there are some. I just haven't been scrolling. Um, so Maria asked, it looks like the amount of involuntary terms has held steady from 24 to 25 as well. What do you imagine are the most influential factors for that? I think by and large, Maria, is the fact that there's just still not a huge amount of workers out there. And I think we tend to allow some of the large company layoffs to sort of, cloud what we think is going on in the environment. We've heard of some of the big companies, whether it be Meta or Google or, some of those companies with these bigger layoffs, but yet, um, it makes up, not a huge, necessarily a massive part of the entire workforce. So I think that's why we're seeing them hold pretty steady. Um, there could be some factors in our data around that because not every client wants us to do exit interviews for involuntary terms. So that's one category I wouldn't focus a ton on because that might be a factor in it as well. But I think right now we're hearing big companies doing some layoffs, but I think by and large, we still have a pretty tight workforce. So people are not just laying off left and right. Uh, Kevin, of course, always has a question for me. How do you distinguish environment noise from manager noise given the impact of managers on culture? Example, management sets annual increase or merit budgets. I think it's a great question, Kevin. I think, again, the distinguishing part of it is that when we're asking people in their exit interviews, we're asking them to give us very specific examples. And so when we hear managers are doing this or a manager is doing that, that's a big part of it. Now, do they have a significant impact on culture? Yes. But I think we're able to distinguish in our data pretty specifically whether it's a manager concern or an overall culture concern. Now, I've said it for years. I'll continue to say it. The managers are the linchpin when it comes to engagement and retention, and you could easily add the third of culture to that. The managers set the pace. They set the tone. They're where employees look to. So I don't necessarily think it's noise. I think they are different, but I do think that they're linked. So that's where I would come out on that. I'll try and scroll a little better over the next few minutes. So one of the things that I didn't mention, but that did show up in our career reasons for leaving was some increase in job security. It's still not a huge number, but it has doubled over the last couple of years. And we're hearing about all of the AI concerns that are out there. Not a day goes by that we're not seeing some article or some newscast, something around AI. So this is part of this amplification, I think, of the employee uncertainty. They're not sure what AI is going to mean for jobs. And so at least if they stick where they are, they may or may not feel completely comfortable with their own company, but they're even less knowledgeable about what another company might be doing from an AI perspective. And so again, they're staying put. They're not ready to leave. The one thing that I think is interesting is that when we did our co-research with Milan, and I'm going to talk more about that in just a second, is that employees were not overly concerned. They're not panicking about whether AI is going to take over their job. What they're really concerned about is the fact that leadership is not talking about it. They're not talking about it internally. They're talking about it in the news all the time, but they're not actually talking about it internally and communicating very well in terms of what their AI objectives are, how they are trying to implement AI in their organization. We see that we're not training particularly well around AI. So we've really got some gaps. So I want to encourage you to go to milanchicago.com/research. Milan is a company based here in Nashville now. They moved down from Chicago, hence the name. But Jennifer Miller is the managing partner, I think is her title with Milan. Very bright person. She and I met probably a year ago, and we collaborated on this research around the impact of AI on the workplace. And so I think there's a lot of interesting data there. I encourage you to go download that report and find out more. So I said earlier, sorry, I had the number off by a percentage, but 74.7% of reasons for leaving fall into what we call preventable categories. Okay, so maybe we should call them more preventable. They're not always preventable, but things like career and work-life balance and management and environment, total rewards, the job itself, those are all things that we have significant level of control over. And so we've got to be able to figure out how are we going to improve our organization so that people are leaving for less controllable reasons. And again, that's a big reason to why exit interview data is so critical, is because I need to be able to show our leadership that we're actually seeing changes. Are we moving from more preventable to less preventable reasons? We might have the same number of people leaving, but we need to be able to show, again, it goes back to that regrettable, non-regrettable kinds of things. And so that is a critical element of it. So you've got to be able to continue to look at this data. It's critical data. Um, and so I just think this is one of the things that we're looking at less and less and should be looking at more and more. So ultimately, what is the data telling us? So unlike what we hear more often than not, sort of in the, around the water cooler and quite frankly, often in boardrooms, is that retention is almost never a compensation crisis. And so we continue to see those total rewards reasons go down. And really, I don't think ever has retention really been central, pay ever been the central theme around retention. Maybe a little bit in the Great Resignation, we saw that jump that we had there, but still, it was only 12 out of every 100 employees that was citing pay as the reason they were leaving. Certainly, this is not a mass resignation. The quit rate continues to go down, so we have some level of stability, and so we'll talk about that. But retention is not solved by measurement alone. And this is the thing that we see more often than not with both our clients and even a lot of people that I just talked to, is that whether it be engagement data, exit data, stay interview, pulse interviews, pulse surveys, most organizations are still just not doing enough to act on the voice of the employee. We're not doing it. We're not communicating effectively. We're not acting on it effectively. I think and I think a lot of times it sits on the extremes. Either we do absolutely nothing or we try and do too much. And so we've got to find that sweet spot in there where we can make sure that we're making progress, that employees can feel that progress, but more importantly, they know that something's being changed based on the feedback that they provided organizations. And so that's a critical element. So just looking at my turnover data or my engagement data isn't going to help if I'm not actually willing to do something about it. So put simply, stability doesn't equal confidence. I'm not very confident in this landscape right now. I think there's a lot of pent up turnover that if we get any kind of positive movement on the economy, we're going to have some real challenges in our organization. So we have to identify this risk before it becomes turnover. So this is the time that we really need to be digging into our data. We need to be paying attention to our data. I hear all the time, well, why would I want to continue to do exit interviews? I've got fewer people leaving, my turnover is going down. Again, those exit interviews are predictive analytic. They are predicting why people are going to leave in the future. So regardless of the fact that my turnover is going down, if I don't have a good baseline of knowing why people are leaving, regardless of how those shifts are going, when turnover goes up, and it will, I think it's absolutely certain that when that turnover starts to go back up, we need to see what's happening in our data. And again, if we've got people leaving for manager reasons, if we got people leaving for career reasons, there's a clear call to action as to what we need to be doing based on that exit data, because it's why people are at risk of leaving in the future. One of the things that I think is critically important is that our engagement assessments have to reveal this emerging risk. Uh, most exit interview data that I'm aware of is trying to measure engagement. It's actually not trying to predict things like intent to leave or intent to stay. That's one of the things that's very unique about our engagement assessment. We call it our employer engagement assessment, is that we know those four core drivers that I talked about. The job, the team, the manager, and the organization are all predictive of intent to leave. So we know the levels that those need to be at in order to establish what your risk is in your organization. And so we've got to be thinking about the current landscape as being risky. We have a risk that's building in our organization, so we have to be able to figure out that. Uh, you know, I would encourage you, because of these behavioral issues that we have, that you look at things at the manager level. Again, 360s, your exit data, your engagement data, whatever you're doing. I think you've got to be able to look at the manager level. How are people doing? Kevin again is chimed in here and said, seems like a good time to do stay interviews. Couldn't agree more. I think it's a great time to be doing stay interviews. I will encourage you that there's two different ways to think about stay interviews. Well, there's really three. One is the manager to do the stay interview. One is maybe HR to be doing the stay interview. And a third would be to outsource it to a third party like Work Institute. Each of those, I think, has its strengths and opportunities. I think it's a good idea to be talking about that. And if anybody's thinking about implementing stay interviews, I'd love to have that conversation. Believe me, I'm a huge proponent of manager employee conversations. So don't think that I'm just going to tell you that outsourcing it to somebody like Exit Interviews, Work Institute's the right answer. But I think you have to understand what is your objective and make sure that your objective is achieved, and how you do them might be an important thing. So again, you break down risk by looking at your NES by manager, conducting those structured stay interviews, as Kevin mentioned, aligning our career pathways, knowing that we have good career paths, we've got career maps, people understand where they can go, how they get there, managers are having career conversations. We've got to address this professional behavior. And again, I think we've got to be integrating our engagement and our exit insights and even our onboarding. Again, I'm not trying to put on a sales presentation here, but one of the things that is unique about Work Institute is those four core drivers persist across the entire employee life cycle. Whether we're doing onboarding surveys, whether we're doing stay interviews, whether we're doing our employer engagement assessment and our exit data, our core drivers exist in every survey that we do. Uh, in a survey world, they would be called domains, and those domains exist across. I don't see any other companies doing that. I think, the onboarding is over here, the exit interviews over here, our engagement surveys here. A lot of times it's different companies or different philosophies that are guiding those. We see consistency throughout that. And so I think it's something that makes us pretty unique. So I think we've got a window of opportunity, and I want to wrap this up here pretty quick. It's a cautious labor market. Employees are watching how leaders are going to respond. We have a little bit of time to act, but we have to do it intentionally, because if we delay that action, I think we're going to continue to build some future risk that's there. And our employees are watching what we're doing right now. They're watching every move that we make. And so I think that the time to move is right now. So I want to open it up quickly for any other discussion or Q&A. I hope this has been helpful to everyone. I encourage you, if you haven't downloaded, I think everyone here probably has downloaded it, but I would encourage you to download the report. A couple of things. One, a lot of companies actually ask us to come in and do a similar kind of presentation at their company. This is something that executives need to be well aware of right now. And so we often go in companies and actually do this presentation. If you happen to be a client, and we had a client webcast, but if you happen to be a client, we can integrate your data into a presentation like this. So we would be more than happy to come into your company and provide this kind of report and presentation to your company. I think this is Kevin again. Thank you, Danny, and your team. What I love about your team is the human interviewing element that can really separate the exit data, to place the categories of data with the more precision you are solving the right problem. This is why I trust your report more than most firms out there. Kevin, I really appreciate that. I didn't mention this at the outset. I mentioned that the retention report had been downloaded, 15,000 times. I think the number of exit interviews in this year's report was just over 14,000, maybe a little bit more. I think this is by far the most trustworthy data out there around why people are leaving. Again, most of our exit interviews are done after people are leaving. They're done through a behavioral interview, so we're not forcing them into a particular category. We're letting this tell us why they're leaving. And so I think this is absolutely data that you can trust. So if you're not a client of Work Institute, we'd love to talk to you. Obviously exit interviews is one of our primary service lines, but as I just mentioned, we do listening across the entire employee life cycle, everything from onboarding to stay interviews, pulse surveys, our annual employer engagement assessment, which is really impressive. It just came out in the last few years. And of course, our exit interview services. But maybe more importantly is that we come along side our clients as partners. So we're really helping you not just collect the right data, but figure out, what do I do with this? What's next? And help you around the accountability and discipline to do that work. And then again, because manager professionalism is such an issue, we have an entire leadership and development training arm. We use that facilitated learning format, and we hear incredible things from our clients about how effective it's been. So I would love to talk to you about that if that's of interest. One last question here, and then we're going to break up. Maria asked, how would you navigate discrepancy between conversations feedback with pulse survey data? We conduct regular stay check-ins and employees state their satisfaction, but then our NES reflects a different picture. It's an interesting question, Maria. I probably would want to take this offline and talk to you a little bit more individually. This is where I was talking about manager employee stay interviews. The one downside of doing stay interviews with managers is that employees are not willing to always open up completely. Maybe the manager is part of the problem, but there's some kind of cultural issue going on where they're not telling you the truth in those kinds of things, and in those kind of conversations. So I'd love to talk to you more about it, but usually there's some sort of underlying trust or culture issue, or we have a manager that's not being very effective, and so we're just simply not getting accurate feedback. I appreciate everybody joining today. I hope this was helpful. Please share the retention report with your colleagues, with your friends. That's why we publish this every year, is to get this information out there. If there's ever anything I can do to be helpful, if that's just an offhanded conversation or whatever, feel free to reach out to me. I'm not hard to find. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm mainly on LinkedIn, but even on the website, it's not hard to get in touch with us. So I hope everybody has a great rest of your week. Enjoy the spring weather that seems to be on the way, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks so much.